On March 17, 1943, the quiet order of a Berlin office was shattered when a thick folder slammed onto a mahogany desk, splashing coffee across secret intelligence reports. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the German military intelligence service known as the Abwehr, lifted his gaze from the stained pages and stared in disbelief at the documents now trembling in his hands. These reports, if true, did not merely contradict German assumptions about the war, they undermined the entire mathematical foundation of the Reich's strategy for victory. According to intelligence gathered from Mexico City and confirmed by multiple independent sources, the Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant in Michigan was producing one fully assembled B-24 Liberator bomber every single hour. To Canaris, and indeed to any German strategist steeped in the Nazi world, such a claim was nothing short of impossible. The B-24 was not a toy or a propaganda mock-up. It was an 18-ton, 4-engine heavy bomber composed of 5 million parts, 450,000 rivets, and nearly 30,000 separate subcomponents. Yet the Americans, if these reports were accurate, were rolling them off an assembly line faster than Germany could produce a single Volkswagen utility vehicle. The incredulity of the moment was not just about machinery. It was about ideology. For years, Nazi propaganda had insisted that America's democracy was weak. Its racially diverse population was chaotic and unfit for disciplined production, and its supposed obsession with consumer goods left it incapable of constructing complex weapons of war. As Hermann Göring, Commander-in-Chief of the Luftwaffe, had once sneered, the Americans can build refrigerators and razor blades, but not aircraft. That dismissive laugh, delivered in late 1941, when German attaches first warned of America's rising aircraft output, now echoed like a curse across the corridors of the Reich. What German intelligence was beginning to uncover in 1943 was a truth so devastating that even those who believed it dared not speak it too loudly. The United States had mobilized its industrial capacity on a scale that defied comprehension, and the consequences for Germany were mathematically inevitable. Major Friedrich Wilhelm Heinz, standing rigidly before Canaris that day, confirmed that he had triple-checked the numbers. There was no mistake in the figures. Intelligence officers in Mexico City had gathered accounts from businessmen, intercepted communications, and conversations overheard at diplomatic receptions. American oil executives, Mexican industrialists, and Swedish engineers were all describing the same extraordinary spectacle. A factory so vast that clouds sometimes formed inside the building, where 42,000 workers, men, women, black, white, young, and old, labored in perfect coordination to produce bombers at a speed no European military power could match. To those within German intelligence, the implications were terrifying. If the reports were accurate, then Germany had already lost the war. Victory or defeat was no longer a question of courage, strategy, or racial superiority. It had become a question of arithmetic and time. This revelation, however, collided head-on with the ideological blindness at the top of the Nazi hierarchy. Reports about America's rising production had first begun to filter in as early as 1941, when Luftwaffe General Karl Kohler relayed warnings from Friedrich von Bottcher, the German military attaché in Washington. At the time, Bottcher estimated that the United States was nearing an aircraft production rate of 20 planes per month. Göring, upon hearing this, laughed outright and assured Hitler that such figures were absurd. To him, the Americans were bluffing, using propaganda to intimidate. Hitler, steeped in notions of racial superiority, eagerly accepted this comforting conclusion. America's democracy, Göring declared, made it weak. Its mongrel population made it inefficient. Its Jewish influence made it corrupt. In this framework, it was inconceivable that such a nation could outbuild the disciplined, racially pure German Reich. But by early 1943, the weight of evidence was mounting. Reports arrived from different corners of the globe. from Mexican businessmen, from Spanish diplomats in Washington, from Swedish travelers passing through Detroit, and even from letters written by American workers to their families in neutral countries. Each testimony reinforced the same impossible claim that Ford's Willow Run plant alone was producing more heavy bombers than the combined efforts of all German aircraft factories. In Berlin, Canaris and his staff recognized the seriousness of these findings. Nicholas Ritter, head of the Abwehr's Air Intelligence Section, conducted his own analysis and concluded with grim certainty. If the reports were true, then Germany's defeat was already sealed. Ritter himself had lived in the United States during the 1920s and had seen with his own eyes how Americans built skyscrapers like the Chrysler Building in astonishingly short time frames. He understood, better than most, the potential of American industrial organization. If these numbers are correct, Ritter reported to Canaris, then Germany has already lost the war. It is now only a question of mathematics and time. The German intelligence network in Mexico provided some of the most vivid details. At a reception of the German Mexican Commerce Association in February 1943, an American oil executive named Harold Morrison had casually described his recent tour of Willow Run. Perhaps emboldened by tequila and unaware that a German spy was listening intently, Morrison marveled at what he had seen. A mile-long assembly line, a building so large that it created its own weather, and a workforce that included thousands of women and black workers contributing to the construction of the most complex machine ever created. He sketched the layout of the plant on a napkin, describing how separate sections of the bomber, wings, fuselage, tail assemblies, flowed together like rivers converging at sea. When pressed about potential production delays caused by such complexity, Morrison laughed. The skeptics at Consolidated Aircraft had once said the same thing, he explained, but Ford had simply broken down the bomber into 60 separate tasks. A housewife who had never set foot in a factory before could be trained within days to install hydraulic lines with the precision required. This was not chaos, Morrison implied. It was the very perfection of industrial order, democratized across tens of thousands of workers. To German intelligence, each such account confirmed the staggering scale of America's mobilization. But to the Nazi leadership, these reports seemed like deliberate fabrications. To accept them would require accepting that Nazi racial ideology was wrong at its core, that democracy, far from being weak, was robust and efficient, and that diversity, far from breeding inefficiency, had become a strength. For Canaris and his officers, this realization marked the beginning of one of the most devastating intelligence failures in modern warfare. They had the data, they had the witnesses, they even had photographs. But the leadership of the Reich simply would not believe. By the spring of 1943, the name Willow Run had become a quiet obsession within the German intelligence community. From Madrid to Stockholm, from Mexico City to Tokyo, reports continued to flow in describing the plant's operations, each one more astounding than the last. Located near Ypsilanti, Michigan, Willow Run was not just a factory. It was a living testament to the transformation of American industry in wartime. It embodied Henry Ford's vision of mass production, reimagined not for cars, but for the most complex aircraft then in service, the B-24 Liberator. For the Germans, the factory was both a riddle and a nightmare. How could a democracy, supposedly weakened by inefficiency and social fragmentation, create such a machine of war? At its heart, Willow Run represented a revolution in industrial thinking. Charles Cast Iron Charlie Sorensen, Ford's production genius and the architect of the plant, had been unimpressed when he first visited the Consolidated Aircraft plant in San Diego in 1940. There, bombers were being built outdoors in the California sun, each one assembled by workers swarming over it, each one slightly different from the last and each one consuming over 180,000 man-hours. Sorensen believed Ford could do better. In a single night, sketching in a hotel room, he drafted the entire flow of an assembly line that would produce bombers the way Ford had once built Model Ts, by moving the product past stationary workers, each trained to perform a specific task to perfection through repetition. The results defied precedent. At Willow Run, 60,000 separate operations were broken down and distributed across 42,000 workers. Women who had never held a wrench before were trained in a matter of days to rivet aluminum skins, install hydraulic lines, or fit intricate wiring harnesses. Young men barely out of school handled supply logistics. African-American workers, long excluded from skilled industrial labor, were trained to operate sophisticated machine tools. Even disabled workers were recruited and assigned tasks tailored to their abilities. The principle was simple. Every available human resource would be mobilized, every hand put to use. What the Nazis called weakness, diversity, became the source of unparalleled strength. The physical scale of Willow Run astonished every visitor. The factory stretched more than a mile in length and covered 5 million square feet of floor space, making it the largest industrial building in the world at the time. Its size was so vast that visitors often remarked about weather phenomena forming indoors. Clouds gathered near the ceiling, and on rare occasions it even rained inside the plant. To foreign observers, this was not just industry. It was industrial spectacle, a visible expression of American power and confidence. Swedish engineer Erik Lundberg, after visiting the plant in March 1943, wrote that its efficiency defied European understanding. He described 600 specialized machine tools, many designed for a single operation, and estimated that Ford had invested over $200 million in tooling alone, a staggering figure for the time. Even allies of Germany provided confirming details. Spain, under Francisco Franco, maintained official neutrality, but played both sides to protect its own survival. Colonel José Ungría, Spain's military attaché in Washington, developed close ties with American manufacturers while secretly funneling intelligence to Berlin in exchange for tungsten shipments critical to Spanish industry. In March 1943, Ungría met with Sorensen himself at a reception at the Argentine embassy. Believing he was speaking to a representative of a neutral country, Sorensen boasted openly about Willow Run's capabilities. He explained how Ford had reimagined bomber construction, reducing chaos by moving parts in subassemblies toward a central line, until each completed bomber rolled out the doors onto an adjacent airfield ready for flight. He proudly described Ford's apprentice school, which trained 8,000 workers weekly, and emphasized how women often outperformed men in detailed tasks requiring small hands and patience. To Ungría, the vision was breathtaking. To German intelligence, his report was confirmation of their darkest fears. Other confirmations poured in from unexpected corners. A Japanese naval commander, Toshikazu Mai, sent a coded message to Tokyo after touring American facilities. That message, intercepted by German intelligence, concluded with chilling clarity. This single factory produces more aircraft monthly than the entire Japanese aviation industry. Meanwhile, letters written by American workers to relatives in neutral countries describe the relentless pace of production and the pride they felt in contributing to the war effort. Each piece of evidence told the same story. Willow Run was not a rumor, not propaganda, but a functioning miracle of modern manufacturing. Yet the higher Nazi leadership refused to believe. When Canaris assembled reports from no fewer than 17 independent sources and presented them to Göring in April 1943, the Reichsmarschall scoffed. To him, the photographs were clever fakes, the production figures absurd fantasies, the workers staged for propaganda films. He mocked the idea that Negro workers and women riveters could build something as complex as a bomber. Hitler himself, when briefed, declared it impossible that a nation could achieve in 16 months what had taken Germany 6 years to prepare. Ideology once again triumphed over mathematics. Meanwhile, Willow Run's workers continued to prove the skeptics wrong. By April 1943, the plant was steadily turning out 650 B-24s a month, a rate unmatched anywhere else in the world. Workers labored in 2 9-hour shifts, 6 days a week, and the plant's parking lots, holding more than 12,000 cars, testified to the ceaseless rotation of manpower through its gates. Women like Rose Wilmonroe, who would later become a cultural icon as Rosie the Riveter, riveted aluminum sheets and installed components with tireless determination. Every rivet we drove was going to help end the war, she later recalled. For these workers, the effort was personal. Brothers, husbands, and sweethearts were flying the very planes they built. To German intelligence officers who dared to face the truth, the implications were staggering. If America could produce bombers at this pace, then the Luftwaffe's defensive capacity would soon be overwhelmed. Even conservative estimates showed that Germany's aircraft output could not match America's even if production were quadrupled. By 1944, the United States would be able to flood the skies with thousands of bombers, escorted by fighters built in equally vast numbers. It was only a matter of time before Germany's cities, industries, and infrastructure would face devastation on a scale never before seen in human history. For Canaris and his circle, Willow Run symbolized more than just industrial power. It represented the triumph of a system they had been taught to despise, a democracy that harnessed the energies of ordinary people, a society that empowered women, minorities, and immigrants to contribute equally, and a culture that rewarded practical results over racial ideology. For Nazi leaders who could not accept this truth, Willow Run remained a myth, a fabrication too dangerous to believe. But for those who understood, it was the harbinger of Germany's inevitable defeat. By mid-1943, the evidence was overwhelming. German intelligence had gathered detailed reports from businessmen, engineers, spies, and diplomats. They had photographs, shipping manifests, and even intercepted Japanese messages confirming that Willow Run was producing a bomber nearly every hour. Yet when Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, chief of the Abwehr, carried this evidence to the highest levels of the Reich, he encountered not cautious consideration, but outright mockery. On April 20, 1943, Hitler's 54th birthday, Canaris personally briefed Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring at Karen Hall, the Luftwaffe commander's ostentatious hunting estate. Spread across Göring's oak table were photographs of the Willow Run assembly line, intercepted railroad documents showing aluminum shipments, and reports from 17 independent sources. Canaris carefully explained that the factory was consuming 16 million pounds of aluminum each month, more than Germany's entire national production. He laid out the staggering mathematics. Willow Run alone was producing bombers at a rate greater than all of Germany's aircraft factories combined. Göring, by this time bloated from years of self-indulgence and weighing nearly 300 pounds, glanced at the photographs and sneered. "Do you take me for a fool, Canaris?" he said contemptuously. "These are obviously wooden mock-ups. The Americans want us to believe they can build aircraft like sausages. At most, this factory produces 50 bombers a month." He laughed harshly, mocking the notion that women and black workers could handle precision engineering. From their Negro workers, from their women riveters, "Canaris, you have been deceived by American propaganda." A week later, Canaris carried the same evidence to the Wolfschanz, Hitler's military headquarters in East Prussia. The meeting included Hitler, General Alfred Jodl, General Wilhelm Keitel, and Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels. Hitler, focused on plans for Operation Citadel at Kursk, listened impatiently as Canaris outlined the intelligence. The admiral warned bluntly, if American production figures were correct, the Luftwaffe's defensive capacity would soon collapse. Mein Führer, Canaris ventured, it is no longer a question of whether Germany will win the war, but how long we can delay defeat. Hitler's response was chillingly dismissive. The Americans are capable of producing automobiles and refrigerators. He declared, but a bomber is not a car. It requires precision, skill, and dedication. When it took us 6 years to prepare for war, they claim to have done so in 16 months. Impossible. He cut off Jodl when the general began to calculate what even a quarter of the reported figures would mean for Germany's air defenses. The figures are false. Hitler snapped. This is a fantasy. The Americans cannot achieve what we Germans required years to perfect. Unknown to Hitler, Canaris had secured perhaps the most damning piece of evidence yet. 5 minutes of smuggled film footage showing Willow Run in operation. The footage had been obtained through American contacts in Switzerland and sent via Spanish diplomatic channels. In a locked room at Abwehr headquarters, Canaris and his deputy Hans Oster watched in stunned silence as the camera panned down a mile-long assembly line. B-24s in various stages of completion moved steadily past thousands of workers, men and women, black and white, each performing specialized tasks with flawless efficiency. A clock in the background confirmed the pace. 1 bomber completed every 63 minutes. Mein Gott, Oster whispered, it's true. And yet, Canaris made a fateful decision. Knowing the leadership would never accept it, he destroyed the film with his cigarette lighter, watching the images curl into ash. We cannot show this to them, he muttered. They would accuse us of creating false evidence, or worse, of treason. The truth was too dangerous to reveal. To admit it would be to challenge the entire ideological foundation of the Nazi regime. As 1943 wore on, new evidence arrived that left little room for doubt. A Spanish diplomat managed to photograph Willow Run from the air, showing parking lots filled with more than 12 000 cars, rail sidings crowded with freight cars, and 47 completed B-24s parked at an adjacent airfield ready for delivery. Analysts confirmed the photographic evidence matched human reports perfectly. Yet when shown the images, Göring dismissed them as clever forgeries. Only one man at the top truly understood the implications: Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister. Unlike most of the Nazi leadership, Speer grasped the realities of industrial production. When he secretly obtained American intelligence reports, his private diary revealed despair. If the Willow Run figures are even half accurate, he wrote on May 15, 1943, we face not defeat but annihilation. They produce more aircraft in a month than we do in a year, but I cannot speak this truth. To do so would be my death warrant. For Speer, silence was survival, even as his trained eye told him the war was unwinnable. Other German economists and intelligence officers reached similar conclusions. Dr. Otto Ohlendorf, an economist and SS officer, calculated that by mid-1944, American production of B-24s alone would allow the Allies to drop more bombs daily than Germany had managed in its entire Blitz campaign against London. Yet such reports, when presented to Himmler or Hitler, were dismissed as defeatist lies. Within the Nazi system, acknowledging mathematical truth was tantamount to treason. The clash between evidence and ideology produced one of the most consequential intelligence failures in modern history. German intelligence was not blind. They collected accurate, detailed, and consistent data. The failure lay in acceptance. Leaders steeped in racist and ideological certainty could not comprehend that women, minorities, and a democratic society could outperform their carefully planned dictatorship. To believe otherwise would mean admitting that the entire Nazi world was false and that the war was unwinnable. Faced with such a choice, Hitler and Göring chose denial. This denial had profound consequences. Strategic plans were built on the assumption that Germany faced hundreds of enemy bombers, not thousands. Resources were wasted on wonder weapons, like the V-2 rocket instead of pragmatic air defenses. Fighter production lagged far behind need as the Luftwaffe clung to outdated strategies. Each month, as American bombers poured off assembly lines and filled Allied airfields, Germany prepared for a war that no longer existed, trapped in a deception of its own making. By the end of 1943, it was no longer simply an intelligence issue. It was a psychological collapse at the highest level of Nazi command. The Reich had the numbers, the photographs, and even film footage. But it lacked the courage to believe what its own intelligence officers already knew, that Germany had entered into a war it could never win, and that Willow Run was the physical proof of its doom. By early 1944, the consequences of Germany's refusal to believe its own intelligence were about to be revealed with terrifying clarity. For nearly 2 years, reports had poured into Berlin describing the unimaginable scale of American aircraft production. German intelligence officers had presented data showing that Ford's Willow Run plant alone was producing over 600 B-24 Liberators each month, while total U.S. production of heavy bombers exceeded 400 monthly. But because Hitler and Göring dismissed these reports as propaganda, German strategy had been based on fantasy. When reality finally arrived in the skies above Europe, it came in the form of thousands of bombers darkening the horizon. The moment of reckoning came in February 1944 with Operation Argument, better known as Big Week. For 6 days, from February 20 to 25, the U.S. 8th Air Force and the Royal Air Force launched a relentless campaign against German aircraft factories and related targets. More than 1,000 American bombers, escorted by hundreds of long-range fighters, flew in massive formations that stunned the Luftwaffe. In a single week, the Allies dropped more tonnage of bombs than Germany had unleashed on Britain during the entire Blitz. Fighter ace Adolf Galland, one of the Luftwaffe's most respected officers, told Göring bluntly after one such raid, "Herr Reichsmarschall, I counted over 800 bombers in a single formation. These planes are real, and they are dropping real bombs." The truth could no longer be denied. For the Luftwaffe, Big Week was devastating. German factories were crippled, aircraft losses mounted, and the strain on already overextended pilots became unbearable. By March, the Luftwaffe had lost much of its ability to contest Allied air superiority. The situation grew even more dire with the arrival of the P-51 Mustang, a long-range American fighter that could escort bombers deep into German territory. What German planners had once dismissed as impossible, thousands of bombers appearing at once, escorted by swarms of fighters, had become a daily reality. This was precisely what German intelligence had warned of in 1943. But those warnings had been smothered under layers of ideology and arrogance. The catastrophe only deepened with the Allied invasion of France. On June 6, 1944, E-Day, the scale of Allied air superiority was displayed in its full, merciless force. More than 11,000 Allied aircraft supported the Normandy landings. By contrast, the Luftwaffe could muster fewer than 300 fighters in response. For German soldiers on the ground, the imbalance was not just demoralizing, it was paralyzing. Any movement during daylight risked instant destruction from the skies. Field Marshal Hugo Spell sent a desperate message to Berlin. "The enemy's aerial superiority is absolute. Our intelligence was correct. We were deceived not by the Americans, but by ourselves." The reality was that Willow Run and plants like it had made the impossible possible. In April 1944, Willow Run achieved its peak performance. 453 bombers produced in just 468 hours, essentially one bomber rolling out every 63 minutes. Its 42,000 workers, 11,000 of them women, nearly 4,000 African Americans, and over 1,000 disabled workers, had shattered every Nazi assumption about who was capable of building the machines of war. Far from being a weakness, America's diversity had become its greatest strength, mobilizing talent and energy on a scale the right could neither comprehend nor match. Inside Germany, the consequences of denial reverberated through every level of strategy. Because Hitler and Göring had dismissed the scale of American production, resources were allocated disastrously. Instead of focusing on practical defenses such as flak guns, radar, and fighter production, Germany poured resources into wonder weapons like the V-2 rocket and the Me-262 jet fighter, both too late and too few to change the war's outcome. Aircraft factories that might have been dispersed earlier were left vulnerable to Allied bombing, and production never came close to matching Allied output. By 1944, Germany was still producing a few hundred aircraft monthly, while the United States alone was turning out tens of thousands of planes across multiple factories. The psychological impact was equally crippling. For Luftwaffe pilots, the sight of endless streams of bombers was demoralizing beyond words. Missions that once involved facing dozens of enemy planes now meant confronting hundreds. Pilots who survived often returned to bases devastated by bombing, their runways cratered, their fuel stores destroyed, their comrades dead. For the German people, the bombing campaigns brought a relentless rain of destruction on Hamburg, Berlin, and dozens of other cities. What had once been dismissed as impossible, an American bomber force large enough to overwhelm German defenses, was now daily reality. By late 1944, the futility of Germany's position was clear even to those who had once scoffed. The Luftwaffe had ceased to function as an effective fighting force. Albert Speer, still struggling to maintain production, could not keep pace with the losses inflicted by Allied bombing. German pilots were sent into battle with only a handful of flight hours, hopelessly outmatched by Allied veterans, and the bombers kept coming in waves that seemed endless, each one a physical testament to the power of Willow Run and America's industrial mobilization. The tragic irony was that German intelligence had foreseen all of this as early as 1942. Reports from Mexico, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland had all confirmed the reality. The data was accurate, the analysis correct. But it was never believed where it mattered most. Instead, the Nazi leadership clung to myths of racial superiority and the supposed weakness of democracy, even as the skies above Germany filled with the thunderous roar of thousands of American bombers. In the ruins of their cities, ordinary Germans would pay the price for this denial. Their leaders had chosen ideology over arithmetic, arrogance over reality. The cost was destruction on a scale that dwarfed anything they had imagined possible when they first dismissed Willow Run as propaganda. By the war's end in 1945, the full scale of America's industrial achievement, and Germany's failure to believe it, was undeniable. The Ford Motor Company's Willow Run plant had produced 8 685 B-24 Liberators, while total U.S. production of the aircraft reached more than 18,000, together with over 12,000 B-17 Flying Fortresses, 10,000 advanced B-29 Superfortresses, and more than 40,000 fighter aircraft. The United States had created an aerial armada that dwarfed anything Germany could ever hope to match. Between 1940 and 1945, America built over 33,000 heavy bombers and more than 300,000 aircraft in total, while Germany, fighting desperately to defend its shrinking empire, managed fewer than 100,000. The result was absolute air supremacy for the Allies, culminating in the destruction of German industry, infrastructure, and cities, and paving the way for victory in Europe. The tragedy for Germany was not that it lacked intelligence about this reality. Quite the opposite. It was drowning in accurate intelligence. Spies in Mexico, diplomats in Spain, Swedish engineers, even intercepted Japanese reports all confirmed the extraordinary production rates of Willow Run. Photographs, shipping manifests, and aerial reconnaissance left little room for doubt. Yet at the highest levels of Nazi command, this truth was not just ignored, it was ridiculed, suppressed, or destroyed. German intelligence officers themselves later admitted the futility of their position. Walter Schellenberg, Canaris' successor, testified at Nuremberg, "We knew the truth about American production by early 1943. Every professional intelligence officer understood the numbers were accurate, but to report this truth was to risk execution for defeatism. The price of telling the truth was indeed fatal for many. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, who had tried repeatedly to warn Hitler and Göring, was executed in April 1945 at Flossenburg concentration camp. His deputy, Hans Oster, met the same fate on the same day. Others, like Alexis von Rohn, were executed for involvement in the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler. Those who survived, like Hans Bernd Geisvius, later reflected bitterly on the futility of their work. The tragedy, he wrote, was not that we lacked intelligence about American production. We were drowning in it. The tragedy was that our leadership refused to believe it because it contradicted their racial ideology. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted after the war, confirmed what German intelligence had been reporting since 1943. Willow Run had achieved the incredible feat of producing a bomber every 63 minutes at its peak, employing a workforce of more than 42,000 that included 11,000 women, 3,800 African Americans, and 1,200 disabled workers. This demographic profile alone would have shattered Nazi racial ideology, which claimed that only the so-called Aryan race was capable of high industrial achievement. In reality, it was precisely the inclusion of women and minorities that allowed America to mobilize on such a vast scale. As Albert Speer admitted during interrogation after the war, to accept that Ford could produce a bomber every hour was to accept that our entire world. You was wrong. That democracy was not weak but strong. That racial mixing did not create weakness but strength. That women could do men's work. It would mean accepting that we had started a war we could never win. Who would dare tell Hitler that? The consequences of this ideological blindness were catastrophic. German strategy consistently underestimated the scale of Allied air power, leading to poor allocation of resources. Instead of building fighter planes and defensive weapons in sufficient numbers, the Reich wasted time and money on so-called wonder weapons, like the V-2 rocket, which, while technologically impressive, had no decisive impact on the war's outcome. Strategic planners assumed they would face hundreds of bombers, not thousands, and thus failed to prepare defenses adequate for the true scale of the threat. Diplomatically, Germany delayed peace overtures and fought on long after defeat had become inevitable, costing millions of lives. Yet amid the ruins, the story of Willow Run also carried a different, more hopeful lesson. At the dedication of the Yankee Air Museum at Willow Run in 1985, Roswell Monroe, the real-life inspiration for Rosie the Riveter, met former Luftwaffe pilot Hans Rudel. Rudel asked her in astonishment, "How did you build so many so fast?" Monroe's answer was simple, "Honey, we just went to work every day and did our job, nothing fancy, just punch in, build bombers, punch out. Democracy isn't complicated. It's just free people doing their best." For Rudel, who had once been told that democracy was weak and diversity inefficient, the revelation was profound. We were told lies, he admitted, and those lies killed millions. Perhaps the most haunting testament came from the final days of the Reich. In April 1945, American intelligence officers discovered a German report on Willow Run, dated April 20th, Hitler's last birthday. The report confirmed everything German intelligence had been saying since 1943, the production figures, the scale of the plant, the unstoppable arithmetic of America's industrial capacity. We reported this truth 2 years ago. The document read, "We were not believed. Germany dies not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of wisdom to believe intelligence that contradicts what we wish to be true. Let future generations learn. Reality does not bend to ideology. Mathematics does not yield to mythology. Truth ignored becomes tragedy." The report was never delivered. By then, Hitler was in his bunker and the Reich had days left to live. The lessons of Willow Run echo far beyond the Second World War. They remind us that accurate intelligence can be useless if leaders refuse to believe it, that ideological blindness can override even the most undeniable mathematics, and that nations that punish truth and reward lies are destined for catastrophe. German spies counted the bombers rolling off the line. German officers presented the evidence, but their leaders chose comforting myths over hard reality. In doing so, they sealed their own destruction. In the end, Willow Run produced more than bombers. It produced proof that democracy could outfight dictatorship, that diversity could become strength, and that free people, given purpose and resources, could achieve miracles. It was not propaganda. It was reality. And for Nazi Germany, the refusal to accept that reality was as lethal as any bomb dropped from the skies